doing another deep dive into an Ohio native species. We are looking at milkweeds and monarchs, scientific name Danaus plexippus. Here's a little diagram of the life cycle. Leave that on the screen for a second. So monarchs are a member of the order Lepidoptera, which includes all moths and butterflies. Every member of this order goes through complete metamorphosis, which is defined by 4 stages to the life cycle: egg, caterpillar, pupa, and adult. The host plant is vital to monarchs. A host plant for a species must be compatible with specific butterfly or moth species, so it's different for each one. Monarch's host plant is milkweed. They will only lay their eggs on the milkweed because the caterpillars require them for their diet. They can't eat anything that isn't one of their host species. In Ohio, these milkweeds are all closely related, which you'll see not only by their appearance but by their scientific names. They're mostly in the genus Esclepius. Caterpillar growth for monarchs involves 5 molts, and the stage between each molt is called an instar. After this 5th and final molt, it turns into a chrysalis. Inside of it, it becomes all liquidy and its tissues reform, and eventually a butterfly emerges. Once it emerges, fluid is pumped into its wings to expand them, and once they harden, it's ready to fly away. A disorder that is common for monarch butterflies and all butterflies is when their wings harden before the fluid is fully pumped out. And this results in that crinkled wing shape you might see, and they usually die because they can't get to food. So you see them, sometimes a butterfly sitting and just fanning its wings. Sometimes it's a butterfly that's just emerged and is flapping its wings out. If you see a chrysalis near it, that's what it's doing. It's trying to dry them off, harden it off. The entire process from egg to adult takes 4 to 5 weeks. Here is from the packet a diagram of their migration. As you can see, they start in America, they migrate south for the winter, they stay here in the winter, and then they come right back up to breed in the spring and the summer. The number of broods that they lay in North America depends on the length of the season. So in Ohio, they'll get 2 to 4 broods depending on how long the warm season is. And then adults from the last hatch, the final brood, migrate to high elevation Oyama fir forests in central Mexico, which is up to 2,000 miles one way. As you can see in this picture, this is a swarm. Hundreds or thousands of them travel in one swarm. A swarm that has made it to Mexico, and as you can see, that's a fir tree from the Oyama fir forests. This is the only biome that they will stay in for overwintering, which is why it's so important to preserve them. So there are several, so this is the Biosphere Reserve. There are habitats specifically made just to welcome monarchs. Once they're in Mexico, they congregate in massive numbers in a few favored spots. And then once they're coming back up, that northward migration, that reaches the U.S. in early March. Migrated females lay a brood in the map's green area, the spring breeding grounds, and that brood's offspring colonize the remaining breeding range during the summer season. I took this chart off of a website. This is showing essentially how much area that the monarch colonies are covering in overwintering sites in Mexico. So it reflects kind of either how much space they have or how great their numbers are. So as you can see, it was at its highest in the late 1990s, and then took its lowest point in 2013 to 2014. It started to rebound, but it's not gotten that much higher overall as of 2021. The wintering population in Mexico was at its lowest again, 2013, 2014, and that same fall and summer, there were very few sightings in North America. It's estimated that the eastern population has diminished for monarchs 90% from 1995 to 2015. That's when the packet was published, I believe, is 2015 or shortly after. It has, again, increased very little since 2015. Some of the causes for this population drop has been damage to the Oyama fir forests. So that's caused by deforesting. As you can see here, illicit logging destroyed just a huge swath of territory. Air pollution and, my brain stopped working, I'm sorry. And parasitic bark beetles have also been damaging to the habitats. It's kind of like, if you remember what we looked at with the Indiana bats, how a great number of them stay in a few very specific, very perfect condition kind of areas. And so when you see any of that habitat gone, you lose a ton of the individuals. Weather has also been a problem. It was estimated that in the 2010 migration, 50% of the butterflies suffered death because of hail, freezing temperatures, high winds, that kind of thing. That's something that humans can't really control, aside from the fact that we've contributed to climate change. But another thing, other than the Oyama fir forests, another thing that humans have really been at fault for is the decline in North American milkweed. The Monarch Watch calculated that 2.2 million acres are lost in the U.S. on average per year. That's a lot, and that's caused by development on land and herbicide use. So, if you see those beautiful fields where it's full of wildflowers and milkweed, that gets torn down for a neighborhood, for farmland. They're missing out on their habitat. All right, okay, let's look at milkweeds. So these were placed in their own family. Not even going to try and read that. But now are generally considered a subfamily of the dogbane family. There are 17 native species of milkweed in Ohio, and Monarchs use 13 of them as host species. There's a hyperlink here if you're looking at the PowerPoint yourself. It's recommended that if you're making a milkweed garden to attract monarchs, avoid using tropical milkweed. It's not native, shouldn't use other non-natives, partially because they aren't as useful for native species, not as many species use them, and it's unknown whether or not monarchs will get a good use out of them, but also because in general, it's good to kind of discourage the use of non-natives to avoid introducing invasive species. So Monarch Watch is a good source to buy natives. Here's a link here. It's also at the end of the PowerPoint, and I'll try to put on the YouTube video if I remember. So milkweeds do contain poisons known as cardiac glycosides that makes them inedible to most insects. However, some insects can assimilate these toxins, which makes them distasteful to many predators. So as you can see the milkweed tussock moth caterpillars here. If you were a bird, you wouldn't want to be eating that. Another recommendation for milkweed gardens, or just your own property management, do not mow down old milkweed after it's flowered. The fruit pods and the stalk fibers are still useful. For example, the stalk fibers are used by Baltimore orioles in building their nests. They use these fibers, you can see here. These fruit pods also release wind-borne seeds with hair on them that's called comas, and birds such as the American goldfinch use that for their nests. Many species beside monarchs are milkweed specialists or obligates, which means that they rely only on milkweed. Their requirements for survival are only met by milkweed, so that's the only thing they eat is milkweed. These bugs that are obligates for milkweeds or specialists for milkweed are often toxic due to consuming that cardiac glycosides from the sap. They're often colored black and orange. You can see here this is black and orange. Black, orange, black and orange. Black, kind of orange. And monarchs are black and orange. This color is aposematic, which means it warns predators that they're toxic. So I'm sure you've heard this example in elementary school. Teachers love to talk about it. But you got your flock of monarchs traveling south for the winter, and a bird comes by and snatches one of them up. That bird gets so horribly sick, and it remembers that black and orange coloring, and it never eats another one again. That's kind of the effect that this coloration has. Again, black and orange, black and orange. This is the milkweed leaf beetle, orange assassin bugs. And then here's that list I mentioned of the 13 Ohio native milkweeds that monarchs use as host plants. So as you can see again, Esclepius, they're almost all entirely Esclepius except for the honeyvine. There's also, at the very end, I have some pictures of other native plants that go well in a milkweed garden, because you don't want to attract just monarchs, and then the adult monarchs use plants that aren't just milkweeds, so you want to have the most hospitable garden for insects as possible. Okay, uber milkweeds. This is a group of 5 milkweeds that monarchs are especially attracted to for egg-laying purposes. They're fairly easy to grow, they're very pretty, and they're easily obtained, which makes them very desirable, and every monarch garden should have at least one of these. First one is butterfly weed, Asclepius tuberosa. It's one of few native Ohio plants that has bright orange flowers, which makes it stand out pretty well. It's a magnet for many pollinating insects, although in terms of egg laying, it's not the monarch's most favorite uber milkweed. Common milkweed, its name is pretty true because it's the most common Ohio milkweed and produces the most monarchs in the state. That's Asclepius syriaca. Syriaca? It's got powerfully sweet-smelling flowers that are known to be smelled from pretty far away. You don't have to be right up on the plant to smell that. It does spread pretty aggressively, however, and is often considered a weed, and as such, many property owners remove it. Purple milkweed, Asclepius purpurascens, that has magenta flowers and is commonly mistaken as an exotic plant. It's fairly tolerant of a variety of conditions, so it grows pretty well. It can grow in partial shade to full sunlight and dry to moist soil. It blooms in June and July, and it attracts many species of moths and butterflies, not just monarchs. Sullivan's milkweed, Asclepius Silivante. That is a prairie species, and it was discovered by William Starling Sullivan in a prairie west of Columbus, Ohio in the 1840s, so it was named after him. It's one of 98 vascular plants originally found in Ohio. Vascular, that just refers to how nutrients travel through the plant. They travel up through a central stalk, so that would be, a tree, your standard bush, as opposed to a moss or a lichen is not considered vascular. Okay, Okay, swamp milkweed, Esclepius incarnata. It's Ohio's only wetland milkweed species. So if you're in a swamp and you see milkweed, that's going to be swamp milkweed. It flourishes along pond margins and on damp sites, and can also be grown in gardens that have rich and well-drained soils. The flowers are either rose pink, but sometimes snow white. I think that's what this would be, is considered snow white. It's a favorite of both monarchs and milkweed leaf beetles, which we saw earlier. It was that orange and black beetle that looked kind of like a ladybug. So if you like those little beetles, you should plant some swamp milkweed. Okay. So native plants are better for native insects than exotic ones. As we said before, it was not recommended to plant those exotic, non-native milkweeds because many insects have specific requirements that are only met by plants with appropriate chemical compositions. A native insect is more likely to find that compounds that it needs in plants that are also native because they've grown and evolved together. The last slide here, I just put some pictures of those native Ohio plants that serve well in gardens for insects. So these are things that you see throughout Ohio. You probably recognize a lot of these, and those are recommended to plant in gardens along with your milkweed species. If my recording will end.